Hello, I'm Dennis Macaulay, and I am Senior Contributing Editor at MIT Technology Review Insights. And I am the author of our latest report on data and AI, which, by the way, was published in partnership with Databricks. That's entitled Building a High-Performance Data and AI Organization. So we surveyed 800 CIOs, CTOs, and data leaders across the globe, and we spoke in depth with several of them to try and understand what's working with their data and AI strategies and where they're heading next with them. Joining me today are 4 such leaders who'll share their perspectives on those challenges. They are Nithin Ramachandran, Vice President of Data Analytics, AI, ML, MDM, and Gen AI at 3M. Ronnie Johnson, CIO of Workday. Bastien Parizeau, Senior Vice President, IT and Digital Marketing and Transformation at Reckitt. And Dale Williamson, who is Field CTO at Databricks. He's representing the platform perspective. So let's dive in. And first, I've got a little icebreaker question I hope you don't mind me throwing at you. I'll ask each of you to please keep your responses as brief as possible, perhaps 2 or 3 lines. But if AI could automate one part of your workday, what would that be? Ronnie, let's start with you.
I have a 40-mile commute to work each day, and so I would like AI to automate my drive. I am ready for the Waymos to pick me up from home.
Okay, let's see, Nathan, if you can top that.
Well, I don't know if I can top that, but I think it's when I'm at work, there's a lot of time spent on, a lot of the administrative tasks, so definitely automating out the approvals. And the other part would be, thinking about the team and thinking about talent development, and providing ideas for skill development for the team would be an area that I could use AI advice on.
Okay, well, you can do that while Ronnie is getting her Waymo ride to work.
Exactly.
Bastien, what would you like to automate most with AI?
So I have a bit of a commute, but to avoid having the same answer as Ronnie here, I'm reshuffling my agenda every Sunday night to make sure that I go through the puzzle of my week. And if I could do that in one click with the understanding of what is a priority for me and where I want to go, that would be fantastic.
Okay. Well, I hope that all comes to pass for each of you. It's a good way to find those things out at the start. So I'd like to get into the meat of things, just talking about the foundations of data and AI leadership. Sorry, Dale, I missed you. Dale, I'm very sorry. What would be your?
I wanted to solve the messy inbox problem. Like, I literally just want the messy inbox problem away. And when I say that, I'm talking about everything. I'm talking about WhatsApp. I'm talking about the inbox. I'm talking about, all the noise that hits you relentlessly. I just wanted to solve that problem.
Okay. Is that before or after you get a ride to work?
It doesn't matter all day because it doesn't stop whether I'm going to work or whether I'm waking up or like.
True. Okay. Right. So on to discussion of the foundations of data and AI leadership. And Nathan, I'll start with you. So the research that we conducted shows that enterprise data maturity seems to be holding pretty steady through massive technological change, not least advances in AI, which seems to suggest that there are durable foundations being laid by a lot of enterprises. So 3M has been innovating for several decades. I'd like to hear from you. How are you going about creating a data foundation that supports Gen AI and beyond that?
I think, traditionally, as we've kind of thought about data, we've always thought about data in the context of a human being in the middle of the equation, right? So part of I think what we have realized is there's always human adding context to the information, and that's what allows for that information to be valuable, right? So as we start thinking about how we prepare for an agentic enterprise, our focus has been, how do we make the data accurate for sure? How do we make sure that we are describing the data with metadata? But most importantly, a lot of where our thought is going into is how are we adding context to the data? Because agents need context and they don't have a human in the middle to help them, kind of understand the context of the decision that they're trying to make. So context, for example, like what part of that process is data coming from? Under what circumstances was, that data generated? So we're starting to add a lot of this context into the equation as part of our data foundations, so that as we start enabling, more and more autonomy with agents, agents actually have the information that they need in order to make, automated decisions. So it's a big part of the thinking, and that's, a big part of the evolution of our data platform.
And could you share what some of the things you've been doing to add that context that's so important to it?
Yeah. So, for example, the simplest part would be looking at business processes and, articulating business processes as, part of our knowledge graph. So essentially, imprinting the data, but bringing in knowledge graphs that describe how the various business processes are designed and how they interact with one another. So this allows for us when we implement agents to understand first, second, and third order effects of decisions, for example.
Okay, that's really interesting to know. Ronnie, I have a question for you about data and AI strategies. This is something we looked at fairly closely in our research. And you've said that data and AI strategies ought to be closely intertwined. Do you see your peers or other organizations out there treating data and AI strategies separately? Is there a case to be made for doing it separately?
I'm not sure what our peers are doing, but I'll tell you there's been a key unlock for us. We obviously all agree that data is foundational to enabling AI. And so we've done two things to make sure that we're, one, getting the value out of it, but two, ensuring that they stay and remain unified. The first is that we tie all of our AI and data strategies to strategic business objectives that have clear hypotheses and a very, very clear business outcome, and we measure those outcomes. But the second, and it's probably it's obvious now, but when we instituted this, it wasn't. We actually brought in an AI strategy and product management function, and we embedded that function in our AI and data science teams. And so our strategy leader reports into the same leader as our data scientist function. And that combined team is responsible for not just operating our data platforms, but building our UDL, our Universal Data Layer strategy, and making sure that it remains rich and is servicing the agents that we're developing. This team also is responsible for prioritizing our AI use cases, selecting the platforms for which we deliver those use cases, and actually defining our AI roadmaps. What we found in unifying these teams is that it's reduced our data silos, it's reduced our data duplication and sprawl, it's enabled faster agent deployment, and the most important component of this is that it's accelerated our time to value for our AI use cases, and it's really helped us reach ROI a lot faster.
And would you say that acceleration, have you seen that across some of the use cases, most of the use cases, all of them?
So this new function that we embedded in the data science team is less than a year old, and our acceleration as we started to because this team also is defining our operating models and is making sure that the teams before they get started on delivering these agents actually have kind of certifications. And so we've actually seen upwards of 3x and 5x in some use cases, depending on the platforms in delivery and time to value. And so we're really like just having a person that's clear, like, hey, is the tech ready? Is this use case well defined? Is the business outcome well defined so we can get to answers quickly? That this collection of folks who are making that determination around feasibility and impact around that prioritization is really helping us get to value so much faster. And so that combined set of teams with this joint objective, which we measure those outcomes, collectively, is really getting us to value and impact so much faster.
Dale, from the Databricks vantage point, what are you seeing? What patterns are you seeing amongst companies that you're dealing with? That are they moving beyond proofs of concept to scaling applications? What are they doing to achieve that, including, by the way, their agentic AI applications?
Yeah, so they haven't, like, companies are still struggling. I think we're in the stage that I like to call waterfall AI. So if you liken it to the days when we were in software engineering, we went through waterfall, we went through agile, and then we went through DevOps, which effectively was just cycles of automation. And we often forget that that took about 30 years. In where we are today in AI, we're in the kind of waterfall AI, and we've actually got really good at building agents. We're very bad at testing agents. So one of the things we're sort of seeing people do really well is start to get into building evals, this thing we call evals, because agents are probabilistic. So the tests are called evals. We wanted to stabilize the behavior. And that, coupled with tracing, which is something actually fundamental to software engineering too, has actually helped us to take very, very simple task-based agents into production and actually help them to be quite useful. Remember, these things are also they're stochastic, so you can't just write an algorithm, stick it in a mainframe, and leave it for 40 years and it will still work. They have to be retrained. They have about a half-life of anywhere between 3 to 6 months. So there has to be some retraining. So monitoring and governance is quite key. And these are sort of where we're at. That means more are going into production, but we're still, as I said, at waterfall. We're still figuring that out. We need to get more agile. And by building more automation type tooling, I think we can get there. And eventually we can get to what maybe we can call agent ops.
Okay, so already a lot of talk about agents. I'm going to come to that in a little bit more detail later. The era of agentic AI, of course, is already upon us, and there's a lot of discussion of AI agents. I have some questions about what the real definition of AI agents are, but let's get to that. You brought up governance and trust being critical. Sebastian, I'd like to ask you to elaborate on this a little bit. When we ask in our research, what are the top challenges that companies are facing when they're trying to implement data strategy and scaling AI, and the most frequent responses they gave us were talent shortages and challenges with data access. How is Reckitt addressing those challenges while maintaining discipline and governance?
Yeah, so I mean, Reckitt is in the CPG business, and so we are very clear about what is our strength and what is our core business. So there is a talent war when it comes to data scientists, AI engineers, and everyone that is actually operating more and more AI transformation or transformation led by AI. So for us, the way we're solving for that is really focusing on where do we need the talent, and the crossover of knowing enough about AI and having domain expertise was the most important piece for us, because our transformation is function by function. We decided to go narrow and deep. So reinventing work processes in marketing. Now we're looking at R&D, we're looking at procurement. And so with this, basically, we decided to internalize and to really chase the talent outside for where we have a good mix of AI and domain expertise, but then for us, what is really strong is to have an ecosystem of partner where we have strategic partner that is selected to help us on those. A very operational one where we know we can rely on them to make sure we get all the AI talent that is required. And of course, a technology partner that is giving us optionality and that is helping us staying on the trend here. And so I think it's broader than talent because it's really the ecosystem of partner, and that's how we look at things. The question you were asking about data access and governance, I think it's an interesting one because what we saw is that, I mean, data and data governance has always been here. And what we've done is two things, right? I think from a data access perspective, I don't think AI is necessarily adding new challenges, but it is accelerating the changes we've seen on data ingestion, data quality, data organization. I actually see that as an opportunity because it is an opportunity for us with such an initiative to accelerate the work that needs to be done on data that we've been talking about for years for all of the data and AI practitioners. And I also see that as a second opportunity, which is now we're calling data what we never called data, right? Well, unstructured data or knowledge is now a piece of data, and we can curate a lot more data. And so we're seeing that as an opportunity. The last piece on governance, Dennis, is we see that the data governance we had in place is still here and needs to be strengthened. We have looked at augmenting our governance with two specific frameworks and ways of working, which is one around responsible AI, of course. And it's not only around governance, it's also mostly around assessing everything that we do to that lens and the ability to say no when this assessment doesn't show that we are at the right level in AI. And the last one I mentioned here that we've augmented our governance with is what Dell was mentioning before around retraining and ensuring that it's also always up to date to the context and the knowledge. We've put in place a tacit knowledge governance, which is looking at the tacit knowledge that we actually codify into our solution. How do we make sure that this is always up to date to our business context, for instance?
Okay. Well, as I mentioned, agentic AI is starting to become perhaps mainstream, or it's off on its way. But Ronnie, as AI becomes more autonomous, how should data and AI governance evolve? For example, does unified governance lend itself to agentic AI use? Do definitions of trust and transparency change with agentic?
We think so. And we are looking for measurable technical and organizational controls as part of that governance. And we believe that trust is accountability and resilience. It's guaranteeing that the AI agent will operate within its defined boundaries, and that when it fails, we have full auditability and a clear path for human intervention. We believe that transparency is explainability and traceability. And that it means that the system can tell you what data it used, what model made that decision, why it took the action, ensuring that there's no black box decisions that are being made on critical processes. We also think that unified governance accelerates deployment because it takes the risk check from the end of the process, that frankly to by design or kind of core to architecture, and that pre-approved guardrails actually do enable speed. And the audibility should be built in, not bolted on. And for us, when we start to really leverage the power of agentic AI, where agents are interacting with other agents, that unified governance ensures that all of our agents are operating under the same ethical and data standards.
So agentic AI, in one sense, kind of raises the stakes for data governance. I see everybody nodding their heads. That's something you all agree with, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Dale, I mean, governance and trust are also challenges of architecture. So, what kind of advice, when you're speaking with customers, what kind of advice do you give them? For example, on balancing open data sharing with control and compliance, and perhaps it's hopefully the kind of auditable control that Ronnie was talking about.
Yeah, so the thing that we have noticed is when people talk about data governance, they're actually talking about information governance over structured data. There's a very narrow focus. And actually, when you broaden the definition of data and you actually think of data in its true form, and you go an image is data, you go different files are data, you go models are data, log files are data, notebooks, which effectively have code or business logic. Nitin talked about business processes earlier. All of that is data. And we do not have a governance solution in the market today that actually governs over all of those assets. So one of the first things we've been sort of setting out to do is architecturally try to unify governance over all assets, to extend it across all of these different files and models and features of models and all these different things. Because by doing that, you can actually harden your security posture. You can put a compliance in, but you don't have to manage compliance in 100 different systems of record. You can do it in sort of one unified place. And this is quite important because it is very difficult. And we kind of learned this. I mean, I live in Europe, and we learned this when trying to impose GDPR and trying to put sort of checks and balances around privacy in place, in 2018, that these things were so disconnected and so proprietary. So the second point is that you want open foundations, and you want to kind of unify these in open formats and standardize on open formats. So if governance can extend and then apply to open formats, you reduce a huge amount of the architectural burden. And that actually is a very, very good foundation for building governance. On top of that, that's where we still have to solve a number of different things like trust and all of those things. The last point I'll make is that it's always been a funny thing that data ownership is hard because you have to kind of own a whole lot of other things. I believe that we have a prediction that over the next few years, we'll be able to automate a lot of those things. Things like data quality. AI is much better at data quality than humans. Things like master data management. I think that actually can be done by AI tools better than humans can do it. Things like PII masking. We can already start to look at how do you mask sensitive data. So that's my prediction over the next few years, is that we'll start to reduce the burden of these architectural challenges with more AI to actually help assist in sort of governance and trust.
I would imagine that a fair number of your customers, and perhaps some of the people on this call, some of the organizations on this call are using AI for data management, master data management, data quality now. I don't know, Bastien, you're one nodding your head. Are you finding that particularly effective right now?
Yeah, I think, I mean, last time we spoke, it was only the beginning of that, but we start to see more and more where after testing, after building more complex workflows, we start to identify some isolated way, or like call them agents, where you can actually cover those unseen tasks and activities in a much faster way. So master data management is a great example of that. There's a lot of where we know it's quite linear what we want to get at, and we know the rules of how we want to transform, and so therefore this is really helping here.
Okay. So Nitin, I have a question for you. Gen AI has helped organizations to reimagine how work gets done. One could think of agentic AI in some respect about being about why it gets done, about aligning autonomous systems, and the operative word is autonomous there, to business goals. So in your view, what does that shift actually mean? And how are you going about trying to identify the opportunities for such agents at 3M?
We're kind of at the start of that journey, of that shift, right? I mean, if you, for most organizations, I think the center of gravity for many of these AI applications is still on the generative side. It's more assistance, it's more knowledge processing, more around summarizing documents, searching documents, things of that, like generating an email, so on and so forth. But we're going to have that shift to where we have agents making kind of that decisions, and that kind of creates that shift is going to be a big one. And that shift, I always look at it in kind of three lenses, right? So you first have the CIO lens, and that's, I think, a lot of what we've been talking about. Dale referred to quite a bit of it. Ronnie referred to quite a bit of it around the shift in technology. Right, we have to bring a fundamentally different set of tools in order to be able to organize information and essentially run technology. Right. So, like for example, in the governance piece, right? I mean, we've always talked about data governance, but we have to bring in our data observability tools that can leverage AI to measure the quality of data real time so that business processes can run, right? So that's a fundamental shift that's top of mind for CIOs. And we're having a lot of conversation around that. And I think that's where a lot of the thinking exists today. The second part is around, for the chief AI, data and AI officers, right? As they think about their teams, while there is a portion of, I think, the industry that is very much advanced in terms of approaching data with an engineering mindset, for most organizations, it is notebook chaos. It is a lot of stored procedures and, non-version controlled code and things of that nature, right? But as we make this shift to agentic AI, stability of the logic in your systems is going to be really important. So for chief data and AI officers, the big imperative is around how do you take an organization that's not and move them closer to what would be equivalent to a software engineering DevOps kind of paradigm, right? And there's a culture shift that has to happen. But I think the biggest shift is a third one, which is more from the CEO standpoint. So if you think about how we view organizations today, so for example, let's take supply chain, right? Most supply chain organizations are organized as source, plan, make, deliver, right? Into like these different domains of activity. But when we start shifting towards agentic AI, it is about achieving a goal, achieving a KPI, right? Am I shipping products out on time? Am I conserving my cost of capital? So as we start looking at it from a CEO standpoint, and this is really where chief AI officers need to help the CEO, is how do you rethink the organization in terms of the activities that people are doing and how they relate to the various outcomes that the organization needs to drive? Because when you start reimagining the future of work with humans and agents working in concert to achieving a goal, you have to fundamentally reorient the organization to thinking in terms of outcomes versus thinking in terms of departments and domains, right? And I think that is going to be the big future of work shift that's coming. I think we will solve technology problems fairly quickly. I think we will solve data organization maturity problems, pretty rapidly. But that big organizational restructure, especially in large enterprises, it's definitely going to be a journey that we're going to witness over the next, few years.
Yeah. Bastian, do you see that shift happening soon, quickly? I mean, you told us when you and I spoke some time ago, as you just mentioned, that the tools that you were seeing were kind of rudimentary, but you just said that things have moved on a bit. So, what kind of signals are you watching? First of all, when do you think that shift is really going to start gaining momentum, and what are you seeing that will tell you it's time to start doing this in earnest?
Yeah, so I cannot agree more with what Nitin just said here. And maybe the way I can explain is through what we've done at Wicked here. So we've approached it as a function transformation. So actually what Nitin was saying is that we acknowledge from the get-go that we cannot make that shift happen if we don't look at our processes first and look at the outcome that we want, and how do we shortcut, how do we change it, how do we make it more cross-functional as well. And so we started with maybe accepting the fact that we have some deterministic workflow in which you have some LLM calls, you have some machine learning as well, and you have some like very basic automation as well, where you need a consistent, reliable output. But we also accepted as some tools where you need to access insights. It's okay to have a probability outcome. And so we started there, right? And I think the C, to your point, Dennis, on the signals we're seeing is that by building that, we've been looking at the maturity of the technology that enables us to do more and more in a more and more autonomous way as well. And we can start extract from some of those workflows what you would, I guess, we're not going to argue on semantics around agents here, but what you would call agents and a higher level of autonomy and a high level of agency. And then in what is more probabilistic, where we have connected, for instance, every sources of insight we've had in the past decade to go all the way to create a product concept. So which is a lot of creativity here. This is where we start to see as well those use cases where you can connect to more autonomous agents, for instance, to test that concept simulate the behaviors with consumers and so on. And we start to see all of the technology ecosystem and partners that we have here, including Databricks, that are providing us more and more tools to actually do that. So it's a really exciting time and really great that we really happy that we've started on that. I would say maybe less exciting, but really good learning journey for us to do that through workflows and combine all of the capabilities together.
So Ronnie, I mean, multi-agent systems are one of the big challenges of this, and the companies have to get to grips with. But how are you seeing that evolving?
I like that you call it evolving. I joined Workday just under 3 years ago, literally around the time that GPT-4 came out. And I kind of segment my evolution into kind of the last three years, frankly. And so our initial kind of year around really thinking about an agentic strategy, we were focused on agents that were really serving the person. And so they were personal companions, they were co-pilots. And then I'll call it the second year journey, was really starting to think functionally. How do we automate and automate functions? And then even creating agents that were agentic and calling the agents. So imagine like we were supporting a customer experience function where we created agents that supported customer success, agents that supported customer support. And so then we needed an agentic capability that could call across those functional agents that actually became agentic for a department. The year ahead of us is probably the most ambitious, and it's the one where we start to think about enterprise level agentic capabilities, where we're not just transforming functions, where we're actually transforming the enterprise, where we're looking at macro level processes that are crossing departments, and we're actually leveraging agentic capabilities to do transformation on levels that I don't think any of us dreamed of back when GPT-4 came out. And so this is a really exciting time. It's an incredible evolution that's ahead of us, but it is an ambitious time. And it's also where data becomes so core, because those silos have to be broken down. There has to be those universal data layers that allow us to actually really get the insights and take the actions across platforms.
Dale, I mean, one of the, I suppose, the challenges of this agentic era we're heading into is the danger of agent chaos. There are a lot of agents coming onto the market, coming into play, and my question for you is how can a unified platform, an open platform, help to orchestrate those effectively and avoid that chaos?
Well, agents. Okay, let's start with what is an agent in our definition, because that's super helpful. So to us, an agent's an autonomous and interactive system which has agency over a task, and this is key. We work at the task level because it's small enough to control, and it handles, the context of that sort of task. The bigger you go, the more unruly these things become. And when you start to play with them, you start to realize they're a bit like, I've got 2 small children. It's very, very familiar. There's things it does that are quite amazing, and then it does completely insane things. So we need to know that is the sort of level we're at. We're focusing on tasks. The other thing that we do is, if you build a system, where data's over here and AI's over there, what you're going to have is very static systems, because they can't operate in a fluid way. They can't operate in a more dynamic way. When the data system and the AI system are on the same control plane, and the data has that access to the unified governance layer, and there's a catalog that allows it to have that sort of discoverability, but it has the same permissions, because it effectively is doing a task, but it's doing a task on behalf of a human. So therefore, it inherits the access controls of the human. It inherits the policies of that human. And that means that it's got to perform those tasks. It also needs skills. So it needs access to skills. It needs access to different tools. And one of the things we've been experimenting with is, like, actually, you need to give these things tools. So we've started to build agents. We had a lot of fun building agents. We then started to build evals to make the agents work. we then went back to building tools, because what we found was the tools needed a registry, the data layer was needed to be unified. And what we started to see play out is more dynamic systems start to play out, where agents can actually start to perform these things and not deviate from their path as much. And I say as much because we're still working this through. Like like as you move into more open systems, it becomes much harder at the sort of enterprise scale. Closed systems are much easier to control.
I want to have a couple more areas I want to talk with you all about. And one that we should never lose sight of this, and from your comments, you all certainly have not been, but that's scaling responsibly. And Nitin, maybe you can tell us, give us perhaps your interesting stories. I mean, 3M is a very large organization, diversified. What are you doing? What practices are you doing to help scale the kinds of systems we've been talking about responsibly, as briefly as you can?
Yeah, sure, sure. And I think, it's not just for myself. I think, anybody in a similar role to me in kind of a chief AI officer responsibility, I think we can safely say that we have not seen the level of, desire, ambition, and acceleration as we have seen over the last 3 years, in the adoption of AI, right? And I think, if you juxtapose that with the fact that, these agents are now designed to make decisions that can affect revenue or cost significantly, right, or customer experience significantly. There's a lot of responsibility as well. So scaling becomes an important conversation. So the way that kind of we're looking at it, first of all, is design patterns, right? And I think Dale referred to this a little bit, right? There are things that you have to consider. An agent is not smarter than a human. An agent is faster and more efficient than a human in most cases. And so when you design an agent, there are things that you have to be thinking about, which you hadn't thought about earlier. For example, the agency and decision power of the agent, right? The action plane that the agent works on. So part of what we're doing is, first of all, from a centralized organization perspective, we're creating these design patterns to make sure that as new agents are designed, these considerations are taken into effect. The second part is the development patterns. So as we start thinking about different agents, and I know Bastian referred to this earlier as well, we think about different archetypes of agents, like deterministic agents, probabilistic agents, and different patterns like that. And we create kind of that 60% ready product, so to speak, that people can leverage and then customize for their business use case. And finally, but most importantly, a lot of our focus is around security patterns, right? So these are things, again, new to, kind of technology considerations, like how do you manage agent identity? How do you manage, the inheritance of the human identity to the agent identity? How do you think about agentic registry? How do you think about monitoring agentic activity, right? And especially as you think about how fast these computational systems can work, monitoring becomes a huge consideration. So the way we look at it is kind of starting with design, development, and security patterns, and then instituting kind of architecture review boards across the organization, so that we can actually empower the teams in the various regions and various business units to actually leverage this and scale responsibly. So it's a lot of work, and I think we're still in early days.
It sounds like a lot of work. And you mentioned a couple of times, you referred to identity, authentication. Authentication is something, when it comes to agents, that several of you mentioned to me when we first spoke. And now, Ronnie, you had mentioned that this was something you were trying to get your collective heads around at Workday. Have you made progress on that since we spoke?
We've made some progress, but as I mentioned to you, we really focused on, I will call it, more innocuous use cases, where we're kind of containing our agents to solving problems or answering questions related to things that are in knowledge, kind of basically in KD articles. We have a few use cases in development where we are starting to pass authentication across the different platforms, but it's one of those things that we're still not yet in production.
Bastian, the kinds of systems we've been talking about, do you try and measure the return, the ROI on some of these? Is that something that Reckitt is gotten a lead on, say perhaps amongst your peers?
Yeah, so I mean, because we approach function by function, and I think we've all mentioned here on the call that we believe it addresses AI addresses tasks, and those tasks together makes a process, right? And so because we're looking at it this way, we are measuring the ROI, and I think Rani mentioned that every AI transformation is tied to a business KPI. So for us, it's no different from any other transformation or change we're making. It needs to be tied to a business KPI. Now, this said, below that, we look at a few things, right? Which is systematically, first, can it work? So when you think of a process and shortening that or making it happen differently, we need, I mean, the state of technology is evolving every day, but you always need to check very quickly whether or not it can work. And then we always expect two things, right? We expect efficiencies from it, productivity, that can come in many different forms. And more importantly, we always check quality of it, which is then ultimately tied to the ROI. I was mentioning product concepts before. We test those concepts the same way we were testing before it was augmented by AI. We actually see results that are twofold versus what we've seen before. When it comes to measuring the performance of our business with a lot of those deterministic workflow and a lot of AI into that, we want that to be much more efficient, time save, and then we want that to be providing a better quality of a decision, which is sometimes harder to measure. But all of that is really all tying up to a business KPI, which is linked to what the function needs to deliver, which is
Okay.
dependent on the function as well.
Dale, I'm going to ask maybe a bit of a higher level question to you. In the past 45 minutes or so, we've been having some really interesting discussions about different aspects of data and AI challenges. In our research, we found that 12% of they're all large enterprises that we researched, that 12% were really succeeding with data at scale. And we call these organizations data high achievers. From your perspective, again, from that higher level vantage point, I suppose, what would you say differentiates these high achievers from the rest? What are you seeing?
So I noticed something very interesting with data high achievers, and that is that data is something that is literate at the board level. And what that means is when people are building a strategy for the business, they're not building it with AI down there as a strategy that happens 6 months later in a response to the business strategy. They're intertwined. So the business strategy, the AI strategy, and the data strategy are intertwined because they actually are so interlinked. So this idea that you build these things separately as separate functions, that doesn't really work anymore. So people are starting to elevate the data leaders into positions where they can actually make that effective guidance and actually help educate the board and help to do that. So that's number one. Number two, they get a solid, really robust data foundation, and actually they do a lot of work to clean house. I was with arguably one of the more remarkable data achievers that I know, who managed to migrate a number of legacy systems, 17 in 18 months, and they're a bank. So that's just just completely insane feat. And they actually used agents to help them do it, which was very, very interesting. So there's this kind of curiosity mentality that creeps into them too. So they have this strong data foundation and they have this kind of board level cohesion. And those are two very principal ingredients. The third thing is there's this kind of almost organizational curiosity. And Nitin actually touched on it with the organizational change problem. You find this kind of fixed stagnation that exists in a lot of organizations. It's almost like the processes have become etched into the souls of humans. And what we have to do is get people to start to get curious again and start to actually challenge the status quo, start to actually hack their jobs and figure out ways to make their teams more efficient. And the data higher achievers are the ones that are actually doing that. They're starting to play around with this. I'll give you a really fun example. Like you can build some pretty sophisticated things really quickly, and you can pull data from different, your different systems of record and start to run simulations on them, in 20 hours, you could probably find insights you didn't have any clue about that actually changes the direction of how you run that function. So, and it's not even using agentic systems, it's actually using very old school mathematical equations and linear programming. So these organizations have got really curious, really strong board level approval, and they have these strong data foundations, and they kind of get out of their own way quite a lot.
You know, getting out of their own way. That's a great way to summarize that. Look, we're coming to the end, but just before we finish, I want to ask each of you again, very briefly, to give our CIOs or the data leaders out there one piece of advice. What's the best decision they could make today to ensure they can scale AI with confidence tomorrow? Ronnie, I'll start with you.
I'm going to take the first part of your question, and I'm going to echo a couple of sentiments that were shared. It's figure out how to build a culture of not just AI fluency, but the curiosity where people feel safe to hack their jobs. If you can create that culture, and it's often giving people environments to experiment in, the tools to kind of learn where there's not a specific business outcome, if you can make it where people feel safe to hack their job, the best use cases come from your different business departments who have learned the art of the possible. So creating the right culture for experimentation.
Okay. Bastien, how about you? What's your advice?
So I go back to what I mentioned a few times, go deep and narrow. To build a muscle, we need to recognize it's in work processes. It is to transform the way we work. And so what the best way we've seen is to go function after function, to really go deep on how AI can transform the business here.
Listen, how about your advice?
Yeah, I think Bastian and Ronnie already covered, culture and approach, right? But I think with agentic AI, as they say, with great power comes great responsibility, right? And I think for CIOs and chief data officers, the key thing is this is a fundamental change in the scale at which data is consumed, but it's also a fundamental change in terms of the criticality of how data is consumed. So data is now a tier one system, like your ERP or like your commerce systems. And it's a big change that organizations need to adapt to. So that's my one piece of advice: is think about the implications of the data platform now. It is a tier one citizen in the technology landscape.
Okay. And Dale, final words of wisdom from you.
I think when I ask a company what are their financial assets under management, I can get a list. When I ask a company what their physical assets are under management, I can get a list. When I ask a company what their intellectual assets under management, and what I mean by that is their data assets, I can't get a list, even if I beg them, plead them, and sit there with basically a giant army of auditors. They will not give me a list because they don't know. And I think one of the things that this movement shows us is you have incredibly valuable intellectual assets in your business that haven't been cataloged, and you should probably start with that.
Okay. Well, thank you, Ronnie, Nitin, Bastien, and Dale. We've come to the end of our webinar. What we've heard today, I think, reinforces what we found. The core message of our study is that enterprises really need to build durable data and AI foundations, and those sorts of foundations that unify data, governance, and AI will be better able to turn that stability into scale. So to explore more of the findings from the research, please download the full report, Building a High-Performance Data and AI Organization. And you'll find that at databricks.com. Thank you for joining us.